In this video lesson, we'll investigate the Boston Tea Party and then the resulting intolerable acts. In 1773, Parliament passed the Tea Act, which gave the British East India Company sole rights to sell tea in the colonies. This act was intended to boost the company's sales, bringing down the price of legal tea below that of smuggled tea, and to drive smugglers out of business. By the fall of 1773, news of the Tea Act had arrived in the colonies, reminding Americans of Parliament's power to tax and legislate for all of the British Empire, which they considered virtual representation. Americans considered the Tea Act a plot to force them to buy large amounts of taxed tea and give up their belief in no taxation without representation. In response, the Sons of Liberty intimidated tea agents in Boston and elsewhere to resign, provoking alarm and reprisal from England. This picture that you see here is a public punishment for the exciseman. In this particular picture, it shows that the Commissioner of Customs, John Malcolm, was being tarred and feathered and forcibly paid with great quantities of tea. Most of the tea merchants were very afraid of violent and intimidating behavior against them. In November 1773, 3 British East India Company ships arrived in Boston Harbor, where, due to local tensions, they sat for 20 days fully loaded with chests of tea. The captains could not leave Boston Harbor without paying the tea duty, which could not be paid until tea agents took possession of the tea and paid the captains for their cargo. Finally, on December 16, 1773, about 150 men, disguised as Indians, boarded the ships, dumping 90,000 pounds of tea overboard, as about 2,000 people on shore watched in what has come to be known the Boston Tea Party. Parliament passes the Intolerable Acts in response to the Boston Tea Party. And Lord North's response to this Tea Party was swift, as Parliament issued 4 coercive acts in 1774 and 1775. They're known as the coercive acts in England, but they're known as the intolerable acts here in the United States. The first act, well, there were 4 of them actually. The Boston Port Act, which basically closed the port of Boston, saying that nothing would get in or out until somebody paid for that tea. The second part was the Massachusetts Government Act, which said that the Massachusetts Assembly could not meet until the tea was paid, and Boston was placed under martial law. The third was the Administration of Justice Act, which said that anyone caught participating in smuggling or in rebellious activities would be sent to England for trial. And the fourth was the Quartering Act of 1775, which said that people in Boston must house in their private homes and actually pay and feed British soldiers that were stationed there. The Massachusetts Government Act revoked the Massachusetts Charter and emphasizes Parliament's claim to supremacy over Massachusetts. The impartial administration of justice said that any royal official charged with a capital crime would be tried in England, which basically meant that they could be given a slap on the wrist or not be fairly tried for their crime in England. And that's how the colonists perceived it. The Quartering Act of 1765, again, authorized military commanders to house soldiers in private homes. And then the Quebec Act of 1775, which actually had nothing to do with the coercive or intolerable acts, was kind of happening at the same time, and so Americans tended to refer to this act as part of the intolerable acts. But the Quebec Act really authorized the continuance of French civil law and government in Quebec, protection and toleration of Roman Catholicism in Quebec, and gave Quebec control of disputed land in the Ohio River Valley, which had been claimed by Virginia, Connecticut, and Pennsylvania. New Englanders considered the Quebec Act an insult to their Protestantism and a denial of their own right to representative self-government. The Boston Port Act closed Boston Harbor to all shipping until restitution for the destroyed tea had been fully paid. The clear intent of the coercive, or the intolerable acts, was to punish Massachusetts for the Boston Tea Party. And the committees and correspondents are going to respond by arranging for colonial leaders to meet in Philadelphia at the First Continental Congress.